Let's talk weird books for the weird girls. This is one of my favourite subgenres of literary fiction, adult fiction in general. There are a plethora of really weird, strange literary books out there. So many of them honestly end up being my favourite books or ones that I am constantly recommending. And as much as I feel like this is some sort of a niche, there are definitely a group of people who absolutely adore reading and consuming weird media and weird fiction. And it's quite interesting to consider what is deemed as weird in these literary books and in these fiction books. More often than not, they have themes including religious imagery, really outlandish and interesting depictions and exploration on mental health. We always have fascinating character analysis, more often than not following very unhinged and feral women doing wrong. I support women's rights, but most importantly, we support women's wrongs here. And these are some book recommendations for that. I have so many book recommendations like this under my belt, so if you would like to see a part 2, definitely let me know. Some of these are definitely more underrated, some of them are absolutely more mainstream and a lot more popular. We have an array and I just love all of them. So let's get straight into the weird book. So here is my little stack. We are going to start with the book on the top, which currently is standing as my favourite book of the entire year so far. I feel like it will stand the test of time, and it is weird in a way that no other book ever has really been for me before. It is so incredibly unique. I am going to put this stack down before I talk about it because my god, it's heavy. But the book is It Lasts Forever and Then It Is Over by Anne de Marken. As I said, this is currently sitting as my favourite book of the year so far, and honestly I don't think anything is going to top it. I will be so incredibly surprised if anything does by December, but we never know. This was one of the most grounding and eloquent and earth kind of shattering reading experiences I have ever had. You're essentially following this girl in the afterlife. She cannot remember her name or the life that she lived prior, and she is very much wandering the world trying to remember. All she can remember, and she is constantly narrating throughout the entire book, is how she remembers her love for this one thing. To begin with, we are never exposed to what this thing is other than the fact that this is the only thing she can kind of remember, and every time she narrates about it, it is in the second person. Every single time she talks about it, it is addressed as you. So as a reader, we're like, damn, she loves us, she's talking about us. And I think that narrative choice makes the reading experience such an impactful one, such an immersive one, and such a personal one that I feel like a lot of books kind of only sometimes scratch the surface of. This is weird and unique and speculative in so many different forms. As I said, she is in the afterlife, but it is essentially kind of a story about a zombie wandering the world alone, kind of how she experiences hunger even more so than perhaps she did when she was alive, and how she can be dead and in the afterlife if she does still experience hunger and what that means. It is incredibly rooted in love and humanity and mortality and what an afterlife means and what death means. Absolutely astonishing, and one of the best that I have ever read ever, and I'm honestly so floored by this. Like, this is one of the best books I have ever read in my entire life. Definitely one for the weird girls. I think if you like I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, which I did not include into this list because I am so aware that I talk about it all the time, I think you would absolutely adore this. It really has that post-apocalyptic vibe while still remaining really eloquent and really thoughtful, and I just absolutely adored this. I truly think that this is a recommendation that I will exhaust until the day that I die. Like, I think everyone should read it. It is such an underrated gem. Please pick it up. I loved it so much. I'm never gonna stop talking about it. Next we have another one that I read this year, and that was Die My Love by Ariana Howick. This is kind of part of a trilogy. I haven't carried on the trilogy yet. I definitely want to, but this book, oh my god. In Die My Love, we are following a mother who has such an inherent hate for her husband and her child. She despises them so much so that she often fantasizes about like harm coming to them and their loss of life. This is definitely a harder read. Would definitely recommend checking trigger warnings for this one. Our protagonist really does not hold back in telling us her most gruesome and darkest thoughts, and they are incredibly disturbing, but it was so fascinating reading from her perspective, and the way that the narration is told in the story was incredible. As a reader, we are so aware in how inherently wrong these thoughts and these feelings are that she has, but due to how the narrative and like Ariana Howick wrote the book, we begin to almost feel sorry for her and really start to resonate with her, and a little bit of understanding floats through the pages. And I feel like for an author to do that with this sort of subject matter is phenomenal and a real credit to their craft. And don't get me wrong, so many of the times when I was reading this book I was like so disgusted, but in the best way. Like, I understood so much of what she was talking about whilst equally being so incredibly incredibly disturbed. It was a book that on reflection, when I finished it, it will have you staring at a blank wall for about 2 hours straight. Like, I had no idea how to feel about it by the end. On reflection, it did exactly what it was meant to do. It evoked feelings in me exactly what it intended, and I just thought overall it was incredible. It had a really interesting character study that I had never really seen done before, and Ariana Howick's writing was astounding. I don't think this is one that I would recommend to the masses. I think I would definitely recommend checking what the synopsis is fully and trigger warnings. If you then feel like this is something that you can read and you really like that really convoluted sort of exploration on characters and mothers, I would then recommend it. But it was one that I would only recommend to a handful, but it was insane. Actually insane. Oh, then we have 2 books from the same author. This author I wholeheartedly absolutely adore. To be honest, another one that I recommend all the time. It is Jenny Havell. So we have Paradise Rot and Girls Against God. The first one that I read from her was Paradise Rot. I read it, I want to say nearly 2-3 years ago now, which is absolutely insane. And when I did not stop talking about it. So you may have already heard me talk about this one before. If you haven't and you have no idea what this book is about, we are essentially following this woman who has moved to a different country for university. She is renting out this house. It's incredibly moldy and damp ridden, and it's essentially falling apart at the seams and like rotting at the seams. It is queer. It explores this relationship between these 2 women, and it is a book rooted in religious commentary, almost an Adam and Eve retelling in a really sick and disgusting and rotting way. This book stinks of piss and of mold. Absolutely so grotesque and so disgusting, but for me personally, in the best way. Jenny Havell absolutely does not hold back in descriptions surrounding mold and rot and piss and everything like that, but I thought it just did such a service to the book. The story was phenomenal, the writing was phenomenal. It is one that I genuinely think about every single day. And then we have Girls Against God by Jenny Havell. This is definitely incredibly different to Paradise Rot, but they do have their similarities. If you do want to know more of the plot of Earthlings, we are following a protagonist who is incredibly young, and I think it's important to remember that the narrative, because she is so incredibly young, is her young, sort of really naive brain, which I find fascinating to read in all the time, even though it is so raw and so hard sometimes. And she essentially believes that herself and her cousin are aliens, and they kind of have to like have this relationship in order to fulfill like a destiny, or in order to whatever, because they are aliens. I think Siaka Murata's works are definitely best going into knowing as little as possible, minus the trigger warnings. Definitely check trigger warnings. This one was incredible, but absolutely incredibly hard-hitting. And then Life Ceremony, I believe, is Siaka Murata's most recent work, and it is a collection of short stories. So in this one we have an abundance of different stories of different scenarios, all again very strange and grotesque and disgusting, but incredible. Siaka Murata is an autobiography again for me now. I definitely want to read everything she releases. They are the staple and the blueprint of weird fiction. If you haven't read any yet, definitely do so. We then have an author who is incredibly new to me. I read from for the first time this year, but I've had her on my radar for years and I've always wanted to read her books. I decided to go for her newest one. Instantly became a 5-star and is definitely still standing as one of the best books I've read so far this year, and that is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. Always heard how incredible Melissa Broder's novels are, and how, again, grotesque and disturbing and disgusting, but incredibly like sexy and incredibly fascinating they are. And Death Valley absolutely did not disappoint. I genuinely think about this book every single day, and it was one that for me was incredibly relatable, incredibly personal, still very outlandish and fascinating, that it was such an enjoyable and incredible reading experience. In Death Valley, we are set in the Californian desert, and our protagonist is essentially, I don't even know really how to explain it. She's wandering the desert, I suppose. Her dad is in the ICU and her husband is ill, and his illness is kind of worsening, and this story is so much about loss and grief and acceptance. How to accept loss before it's even happened, and especially once it does happen, how you survive that and how you survive guilt. Definitely had a slight magical realism element. This was also the book that, if you remember, I posted it on my BeReal and I shared it everywhere. I was reading a scene on my Kindle, posted it to my BeReal with confidence. This was what was on the screen. It wasn't even smart. If that doesn't tell you how weird this book is, I don't know what does. This is definitely one of the best books that I've read so far this year. I think the way that Melissa Broder wrote these themes with such care and such delicacy, but equally so much exploration, she did not really hold back at all in terms of exploring such difficult themes. There is a really interesting scene with a cactus. The Cosmopolitan actually blurbed it on the back as Think the Chronicles of Narnia, but instead of a wardrobe, it's a cactus. And honestly, hit the nail right on the head. I adored this with everything in me. I think this was a perfect example as to why I love weird fiction, what I love in weird fiction. Again, genuinely is one that I think about every day. I'm so excited to read more from Melissa Broder. I have the Pisces and Milk Fed up on my TBR next. I need to get to them. I'm so incredibly excited. I think Melissa Broder is definitely going to become a favourite author for me. This was 5 stars, incredible, would highly recommend. And finally, we're on to the last 2 books. This one was one of the first sort of like weird girl, probably weird girl, unhinged female protagonist fiction books I'd ever read. And take a wild guess, it was Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Eliza Clark is another auto-buy author for me now. Absolutely adored Penance. Boy Parts awoke something in me. I'm not gonna lie, it really was the start of my weird girl fiction era, and I absolutely love it for that. This is another one I definitely recommend checking trigger warnings for. This one does not hold back. We are essentially following a protagonist who I think is in Newcastle. Yeah, she's roaming the streets of Newcastle. She is a photographer and she basically scouts these men to take photos of them in really precarious and weird sort of angles. It is a story steeped in misogyny and patriarchy and trauma and survival. It really explores taboos of sexuality and gender roles in general, but especially in the UK, and it was just astonishing. Like, our protagonist, again, I support all of her wrongs. I adored her, although she did scare me at times, so she was definitely a bit morally corrupt. What a babe. That was Boy Parts, would recommend. And then last but certainly not least, this one is less so strange, more so, oh my god, I can never see the world the same again, and that is Severance by Ling Ma. If you do already know me, you know that I love post-apocalyptic fiction. I love anything that is a little bit dystopian in a very speculative sense, and this is one of those books that did it phenomenally, and again, I think about every single day. In Severance, we are following this pandemic that is breaking out, but more so than ever is really a story about capitalism and consumerism, how even at the end of the world and a zombie apocalypse, although I will say this definitely takes zombie apocalypse very uniquely and in a way that I have never seen done before, how even in that circumstance and truly at the end of the world, we will still be a consumerist and a capitalist society, and how we are as individuals in that scenario. Our protagonist is devoted to her work life, and it is so fascinating seeing her narrative in this scenario and in this circumstance of the end of the world, when she is so devoted to her work, so much so that at the end of the world, my babe, she's working on her laptop at the end of the world. It has so much commentary on family. It is such an incredible satire that I genuinely think more people need to read. This was also published, I want to say, in 2018, so pre-COVID, and it is so fascinating being post-COVID and seeing how much the world stopped in comparison to how it didn't stop, and what us as individuals did to kind of survive this pandemic. It was fascinating, and reading it post-COVID really was quite awakening and enlightening and incredibly personal and incredibly relatable. It is one that I absolutely want to reread, and I genuinely think so many people would absolutely adore. So again, would recommend. So those were the 9 weird sort of literary fiction books that I would recommend for the weird girls, or if you just like a weird fiction, weird literary fiction. I absolutely adore all of these and their authors and this subgenre. If you have any recommendations that I haven't mentioned in this video, please feel free to comment them down below. I am always looking for more weird books. As I said, I do have some more recommendations, so if you'd like to see a part 2, definitely let me know. But if you do have any recommendations, I'm all ears. Thank you so much. Yeah guys, that is it for today's video. If you watched until the very end and you want to show you stayed until the end but you don't really know what to comment a cactus emoji for Death Valley. Of course, as always, if you enjoyed this video and you are not yet subscribed, please feel free to do so. We have so much fun over here and I would love to have you here. And as always, the biggest thank you for being here and for spending some time with me, and I hope to see you again very soon in another video.